Hi guys, it's Corey from Smart Alec Resources, and today I am here to talk about reading foundations. So the goal of this particular mini course is really to go over what is involved in learning how to read and to understand how and why reading deficiencies happen. So one of the things that's important to recognize when we're thinking about reading is all the things that go into this. It's really, really challenging process. It's not simple for the human brain. So it's often easy to think that it's simple because kiddos learn how to read at 4, 5, sometimes even younger. And so it's easy to think that this is just a really simple process, but really it's not. It's important to understand that our brains really weren't designed to be able to read. It's something that really we evolved as a species to be able to speak and communicate ideas, but then it really came much later where we felt that it would be helpful to have this information shared in the specific way in which we would write information down, and then the brain would need to decode essentially the message. And really that's why we say decoding, because it's a code that we have to be able to break. It's very complex. So as is noted here, reading really is an amazing and complex integration of multiple parts of our brains really happening all at once. So when we think about the different processes that are involved in being able to read, there are 4 processors in the brain that we are using. So we've got a phonological processor, which really is a focus of the sounds, the individual sounds that we hear within a word. The orthographic processor, which is the letters or the pictures that we see that make up the word. The meaning being the definition of the word. And then the context processor, really adding that deeper understanding. So the phonological processor, if we think about that piece, it's, for example, the sounds we hear, k, ah, t. Those are all the individual sounds that we hear in the word cat. When we look at the orthographic processor, we're looking at the letters C, A, T, and they have this very specific picture that we see every single time, and those come together to make the word cat. When we think about the meaning, really what we're thinking about is, what is this thing? What is this thing? At, cat, what is that? And you can recognize that this would be more challenging if you were coming up with a novel word or a word you didn't know of. Maybe you didn't have the meaning processor completely there yet. When we think about the context processor, that's even a little bit deeper. And so, for example, it's a little bit trickier with the word cat, because usually we have kind of one meaning. We're able to think about that in context. But you could think about words like bat. Bat might be a little bit different, because depending on the context, but depending on what else is going on in that sentence, you may be thinking bat like the animal. You might be thinking bat like the baseball bat. You may be thinking bat like the action you are going to be batting the ball. And so that's where that context processor may be working with the meaning to adapt, to add that deeper understanding. Additionally, when we think about the meaning processor versus the context processor, you might be thinking about, idioms and things like that. So things like it's raining cats and dogs. We might be thinking about the meaning processor and really thinking, cats, do cats come from the sky? No, not really. That would be a place where that context processor might kick in and say, this appears to be a figure of speech, because that doesn't necessarily make sense as it stands. So when we think about all of those processors, we start to get a really deep understanding of just how challenging the reading process really is. A breakdown in any one of these 4 processors is going to lead to reading struggles. Of course, depending on which processor is struggling, we're going to have a different presentation of that reading struggle. But again, if we have multiple processes breaking down, then we've got even more work that needs to be done. But don't worry, we're able to remediate a number of these things. It just takes time, and of course, the more breakdowns that we have, the longer it's going to take. But that's okay. That doesn't mean that it can't be helped. So digging in a little bit deeper into the phonological processor, again, that's the neural network that's really designed to hold all the different sounds of a word in our brain. Really, there can be a number of difficulties here. For example, pronunciation. So sometimes if we have a breakdown in the phonological processor, it may be something as simple as an articulation disorder where we actually can't say the sounds. It's really just a breakdown in the phonological loop. So we kind of have this loop of our brain of hearing, processing, pronouncing, and then hearing that word back in our own ears. It's really interesting. I remember as a young kiddo, I couldn't say my R. And I remember we had a woman who was a friend of ours, and her name was Pearl. And I was consistently calling her Paul. And I remember my mom would say, no, it's not Paul. Her name is Pearl. And I remember very vividly saying Pearl and hearing Pearl in my own ears, and my ears didn't have anything wrong with them, and being so frustrated by that. And again, it was just a breakdown in that phonological processor. But yeah, we can have a number of different difficulties in phonological processing. So one of the things that we like to work on, and a number of the skills that we might be looking at, is can a kiddo rhyme? Can they tell the difference between words that maybe sound really similar? So things like pig, big, those words very similar. Can we tell the difference between them? Can we tell what the first or last sound within a word is? Can we recognize how many syllables are in a word? How many sounds are in a word? And of course, as we progress on down the age, we expect students to get more and more adept at being able to do higher level phonological processing. So we do have a number of games that we play and things that we do. We try to use PA or phonological awareness games in really meaningful ways and make sure that that work that we're doing is relating to specific patterns that we're working on or teaching. So really what we're trying to do is make sure that when we are working on that phonological processor, that is coming in alignment with whatever we're doing for the orthographic processor and the meaning processor and the context processor, so that we're getting all of those reading processes working together. And even though we work on each of them in isolation and we target them each differently, that we're bringing them all back to the big picture there. This is kind of warming the brain up for those higher, deeper level reading skills. All right, let's keep going. So orthographic processor, again, this is the neural network responsible for perceiving, so seeing, holding on to, remembering letter sequences in words. So this is important because it's going to take the actual letters that we see, the very specific letter, and make sure that we have those in the sequence that we want them to be. So if we take a look at the example over here, this is really important to recognize, because if we look at the letter T and we see the letter T and we know that's a T, we need to also be looking at the letters around it. So T by itself, or T that's not followed by an H or a CH, is just going to say T, and we need to be able to recognize that. When we see a TH, we're thinking either or Z, so you've got the unvoiced and the voice. So like in thistle versus this, we've got both of those sounds there. TCH is giving us the ch sound, like in catch, fetch, all of those types of things. So it's really important not only that we recognize what the letter looks like and then the specific sound that it makes, but also the groupings of those letters might change it even more so. Thinking about T-I-O-N, for example, if we were going to take that one step further, we get shun all of a sudden. So just knowing T by itself is not quite enough. Again, just thinking about the letters of our alphabet, they're just shapes. We need to explicitly teach students what they represent. They represent those sounds of our language. Students who struggle with this are going to need to practice what we call the sound card drill, to recall the sounds that letters make. And then also we need to make sure that we're flipping that. So for example, we have an AR card here. So this is just part of our sound card drill. AR says R, as in car. We're going to recognize that as a letter group, Alternatively, without looking at the cards, without looking at those letters, we might say, what says R? And we are looking for the student to write down AR. AR says R. It's important to have both of those. It's important to do the card drill where we're looking at the card to help support reading intervention and making sure that they're able to see those patterns when they're reading words. When we think about the reverse drill or the auditory drill, what says R, all of a sudden we're thinking about spelling and spelling development there. So both of those things are equally important. It's important not to leave one out because it can be easy to do. Digging into those higher level processes, so the meaning processor, we're really thinking about word meaning in relation to other words in the same semantic field. So for example, if we're thinking of cat, then all of a sudden we might be also thinking about what are some other words that are kind of similar to cats. We might be thinking of tigers and lions and other things that really have sort of a similar or related meaning. We also might want to be thinking about categories and concepts. So again, thinking about cat, this is an animal. What are some other animals that we know? Dogs, horses, all of those different things. Context phrases. So again, just depending on how that word is used, we're really getting kind of a really clear picture. So, you know, kitty cat, maybe we're thinking of something kind of minuscule and small and cute, versus a gromolkin cat, and we're thinking of an older cat or a cat that's, you know, maybe sometimes a little bit meaner, less fun and playful. Also thinking about meaningful parts and morphemes. So cat versus cats. So one cat versus a group of cats. All of a sudden we're kind of thinking about things a little bit differently. The difference between camp, camped, camping. We're definitely thinking, we have different pictures in our head for each of those things, even though the base word is the same. So those morphemes are just ways to be adding on meaningful parts to the word. Also the context processor. So this is, again, that deeper level of interpreting words that we've heard, named, partially identified, with reference to what we know about the English language, experiences that we've had, and knowledge of concepts. So this is really important because oftentimes when we teach decoding, what happens is the way that we actually pronounce the word or that we've heard the word and know the word is not actually exactly the way that it's decoded. So for example, if I was reading a word that said something about the president of the United States, I might need to take a look at that president of the United States and really pull back some of that language and experience and knowledge of those concepts to say, oh, the president, it's the president. I syllabicated that wrong, or when I pulled that all together, it wasn't quite right. And so we have to use that vocabulary and that knowledge to be able to make those corrections. And that's just part of reading. It's not that you've mistaught a concept or anything. It's just that's part of it. It really provides that reference for the word meaning. Again, spelling of words such as past or past. When we look at those words, past, like I passed my friend a note, versus in the past, it sounds exactly the same. And so we also need to be able to really think about the context of the sentence. Passed, like I passed somebody a note, I need to be thinking, is this a verb? Is this something I do? If this is something I do and I'm hearing that t sound at the end and it's past tense, I should be using an ED. So this is a very complex process when you think about all that goes into the reading, but also the spelling. Again, thinking about these deeper level processors, students who struggle with the meaning and context processors may be able to decode words. In fact, a lot of kids who sometimes we'll say are hyperlexic do really nice job decoding words, but they have no idea how to use them. They don't know how to use them properly in a sentence, or they don't know, potentially maybe they can't come up with multiple meanings, or they just can't take it that step deeper. So morphology is really important. It can play a really powerful part in instruction. If we can teach common affixes, it's really going to help us out. So for example, globe. Do we know what a globe is? Maybe we can actually see a picture of a globe. That can really help pull some concrete meaning to, okay, well, if we know what a globe is, then what do we think about global? Oh, all right. Well, that's kind of a relation to the globe. So all of a sudden, global, we're thinking, all right, we're looking at the world context here. Okay, well, what about globalize? What about globalization? And so if we really start kind of pulling out, we can get some really big words out of words that we do have some meaning and context for. This is also where things like teaching Greek and Latin roots can be really helpful. So for example, Latin root, ject. If we know that ject means to throw, all of a sudden we can start thinking about what object maybe might mean. Okay, to object, I'm throwing in a different opinion or a negative opinion to something. We can really start to dig a little bit deeper there. So that's just a much higher level processor. Typically, we're going to work on building these after we've made sure that the phonological processor and the orthographic processor have really come together, or that foundation is really set. Finally, what causes reading failure? So we've got a number of different things here. When we think about all of those different processes that we have, really we know that there's a number of places that this can break down. So English as a second language, absolutely we might be struggling a little bit more with the phonology of the language is different. The context processor, the meaning processor, those things are going to need to be built up a little bit more. If we have limited experience with books, then we're probably going to expect to see a meaning and context processor being a little weaker. Dyslexia and other learning disabilities are likely impacting the phonological and the orthographic processor. So if we can get those things in place, then usually the others fall into place as well. Cognitive or language deficit. So a cognitive deficit is likely going to impact a child in all four processing areas. So that's going to take quite a bit more work to get them to a place of functional reading ability. Language deficits, depending on where those deficits are occurring, can be something as simple as that phonological processor, so looking at deficits in articulation or things like that, versus a deeper mixed expressive receptive language disorder. We're probably looking more at that meaning and context processor. Finally, inadequate instruction can also impact the ability to have some of these things falling into place, and it's something as simple as just giving that explicit instruction. They pick it up really quickly, and that's all that they needed. Those kiddos are usually pretty quick to remediate unless the inadequate instruction has been going on for a great deal of time. Then it might take a little bit longer. So specifically, what is dyslexia? Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is causing difficulty, again, in that phonological processor. Really, when we think about the definition of dyslexia, it's that a student is struggling to read at the single word level. Potentially, their reading fluency is going to be poor. In fact, most of the time, their reading fluency is going to be poor. And oftentimes, it's poor spelling as well. And that's all coming back to that difficulty in the phonological component of language that's not expected due to any of these other pieces. It's not due to English as a second language, or a limited experience with books, or a cognitive delay, or inadequate classroom instruction. Dyslexia is not a problem with vision. This is a really common misconception, because students will often say that they feel like the letters are swimming around on the page, or that the letters are moving around, or we see it as a transposition of letters. And so it looks easy to think, okay, this is just a vision problem. Vision is just, it's the way that we get information into the language processing centers of our brain. So yes, vision, we need to have adequate vision, meaning that we need to have good acuity. So if you have the ability to see the letters, that's really what we're thinking about here. That's it. Vision is not, vision therapy, things like that, absolutely unnecessary, will not help cure dyslexia. There is no cure for dyslexia, but oftentimes that's what these programs are promising. Dyslexia is not a cognitive deficiency. These kiddos that have dyslexia are as smart as their peers. They fall absolutely within the normal distribution of intelligence. They're not any less cognitively able than everybody else in their classroom. They're not reading backwards. They are not just unmotivated. And dyslexia is definitely not fake. They have genetic markers that it's very, very close. In our lifetime, we will definitely see a cheek swab. I'll put my money on it for dyslexia. It is neurological in origin. So again, it comes from a brain basis. It is a difference in how the brain processes information. There is nothing wrong with the way it processes information. It's just different. And it is a pain when learning how to read, but it can be a huge strength in other areas. Very much outside the box thinkers. It's amazing. So again, just as kind of a wrap up sum here, proficient reading depends on phonological awareness, the ability to see and recognize words quickly, having a strong enough vocabulary to be able to make meaning, then being able to construct meaning, so connecting the text with things that we know from past knowledge, and then making sure that we're double checking as we're reading that what we're reading makes sense, and kind of going back and fixing things where it doesn't make sense. So the 5 components of good reading instruction would include that we need to make sure that we're hitting on phoneme awareness and letter knowledge, that we've got that sound symbol correspondence, that phonics and decoding piece, that we've got good spelling and word recognition, that we're focusing on fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Those are the 5 pieces that must happen in good reading instruction. And then we've got a glossary here for you just to go over some of those terms. You've got all of those. We've got some great videos here and some great PDFs that you can definitely take a look at as well. These are really, really great reads. Teaching reading is rocket science, as you can tell from everything we talked about. That's absolutely the case. And then just some really good stuff about reading in this Put Reading First. That is it. That is all we have. That's a lot of information. There's a lot of kind of science and deep dive there, but it helps to really understand why a lot of times reading intervention isn't working. It's because it's not specifically targeting all of these core processing areas of the brain that need to come together. So hopefully you're able to hang in there for that one. That was a long one. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to join us, connect with us. So join us in our private Facebook group, become a member of our website where we've got all of the information to be able to provide these lessons. We've got 30 lessons at both, or actually at all the beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. So that's 90 lessons total. And they follow really this sequence that we are looking for, making sure that we're hitting all 4 processors of the brain. We're hitting all 5 necessary components of good reading instruction. And so you can definitely join our website, and then you get access to our membership group, so you can touch base with us there. You can also check out our website And if you're interested and just want more information, feel free to shoot us an email. It's info, I-N-F-O, @ascendlearningcenter.com, and we'd be happy to answer your questions there as well. Thanks for joining.